This is a bone stock QJMotor SRT 450 RX. Stock exhaust, stock suspension, luggage racks, everything exactly as it comes from the showroom. And despite having absolutely zero experience with navigating roadbooks, QJMotor let me take it to a 3-day rally raid and abuse the hell out of it. And this is how it went. I'm Nimrod. Welcome to Ride with Nimrod. Now let's jump in. Right, welcome back guys. A quick note before we get into it, I've already done a full review of the SRT 450, so if you are looking for a general rundown of the bike, you will find that video linked below in the description. And this one's obviously a little different. It's about how the bike actually behaved once it got properly abused off-road. So who am I to be telling you this? I'm an independent adventure bike YouTuber with a background in motocross. I used to race the Romanian Pro Outdoor Nationals, which is pretty much the equivalent of the C-Class State Outdoor Nationals of Alabama, I suppose. But jokes aside, I actually used to race professionally back when I still had a full head of hair. Nowadays, I do adventures, I film them, I review motorcycles, I review gear, and thanks to this YouTube channel, I happened to get the chance to take one of these motorcycles to a rally. And to be clear, because this seemed to confuse quite a few people at the race itself, I have zero affiliation with QJMotor. I am not employed by them, I have no contract. I've generally just seen their bikes at EICMA last year. I researched the brand and I've included them in one of my top 10 bikes to look out for in 2026 videos, and I've reached out to them in hopes of reviewing some of their new models. And that's how the general review happened. I was particularly excited about the SRT 450. I wanted to pin it against its most obvious rival, which is the CF Moto Ibex 450 MT, which is still getting its own videos, so make sure to subscribe to the channel to not miss that. Made a short teaser, and the guys from QJMotor came back with, hey, we're sponsoring a local rally raid event and we actually have a 450 spare if you want to see what it can do. After a slight hesitation, I wasn't going to say no to that. Couple of problems though. I was in the physical shape of a dormant rock. I'd never navigated before with the Roadbook, nor did I have a Roadbook tablet or the actual handlebar remote to control one. And obviously no real idea of what I was actually getting into. So naturally, I said yes. So then I got myself in a position to have to get creative. I studied the Terra Pirata Roadbook app, I realized that it works on my iPhone, backed up my quad lock case and figured my palm-sized iPhone will serve as my Roadbook. Not ideal, but shout out to quad lock because that phone went through hell and back and didn't miss a beat the entire time. I was already a quad lock user, having all of their components, all of which I bought with my own money, but this time around I can really say that I've properly tested their products. So heads down to quad lock. As for physical training, that was me walking my dog every day. And the Roadbook theory side, I covered by playing the Dakar video game. I know, very professional, but hey, it works. So I packed my gear, drove out to the Western Carpathians, which would serve as the rally bivouac for the next 4 days. I got there, I met the QJ crew, I met the organizers, I met the other racers, and mind you, it's not like I'm a factory rider with a pit full of mechanics. I got the stock bike half a day before the start. And when I say stock, I mean as stock as it gets. Mind you, it still had the top box attached. It obviously has the exhaust with the catalytic converter, which is there for legality reasons, obviously not ideal for a rally. Basically everything you roll off of the showroom floor with. The only change is I've asked them to mount off-road tires in advance in case of a rain or something, and boy did that turn out to be a good decision. And they pulled the handguards, which as you know are really road focused, having the turn signals built into them. So I opted to race without the handguards just because I wanted to avoid destroying them, because I was expecting to drop the bike a few times. And one last thing, QJMotor confirmed this so late that I never actually made the official entry list. I did have the timing chip, the GPS, and everything else all the other racers had, so I was racing the sponsor's bike. Even the race number I got didn't include my name on the top because they obviously didn't have time to arrange for that. So this just meant I rolled out last every single morning, empty track behind me, the entire field in front of me. You'd think this would be an advantage where you actually have to navigate having all the tracks in front of you, but all the stages actually had quite a lot of loops. Also, some of the stages shared some of the sections from previous days, just maybe the other way around. So the tracks just obviously ended up confusing me more than actually being an advantage. But the idea is that I can't exactly tell you where I finished. I was obviously under racing conditions, the adrenaline kicked in, I was passing a lot of other riders, but there was nothing really for me to finish. The only thing being tested out there was the bike and me. So let's get into the riding part. I'll try to go through how the stages actually progressed. It was a 3-day event. What weather we had rain, we had mud, we had fog, we had all sorts of conditions. What the bike felt like, what the suspension felt like, what I liked, what I appreciated having on the bike, and what I was really lacking. Day one understandably started with a bit of anxiety, this being my first rally and all, topping that off with the fact that it wasn't exactly my personal motorcycle, and right, because it was also raining cats and dogs. The organizers did an extremely good job managing the situation and moved the shortest stage to said rainy day, which reassured me a bit because at least my most difficult day on a motorcycle would be cut short. We essentially rode down into the valley and then climbed back up on the other side, had 20 kilometers to ride up to the start of the special stage, and even though it was raining on and off, I still took a bit of time to take in the moment. Reality started kicking in again when I began seeing riders already coming back down the mountain, either because they hadn't started at all or because they had DNF'd. So that didn't exactly help with the whole anxiety situation. At one point I was already telling the closing riders that I would probably end up riding with them. That plan lasted until I reached the start, because as soon as I set off, the adrenaline kicked in and I was on my own. I still tried to manage my energy during the first few kilometers. I didn't want to crash early or completely exhaust myself within the first 10 kilometers. The objective was not to prove how fast I could ride, but rather to finish the stage, preferably without embarrassing myself or disappointing the people from QJMotor who had trusted me with the bike. Before I forget, some of you were asking how I'd set up the suspension for the event, and I'd had this whole plan to adjust it, test it, and then adjust it again until I found the sweet spot. Yeah, that never happened because I ran out of time, so I went full freestyle and figured that if something really wasn't clicking for me, I just adjusted on the go or back at the Bivouac. In the end, both the front and rear suspensions were left on the factory settings, and in all honesty, I didn't really have anything to complain about, especially considering the conditions, but a bit more about the suspension on day 2. Once I warmed up a bit, I gradually found my rhythm. I reminded myself that although I was completely new to rally navigation, I wasn't new to riding off-road, and I already had experience with this particular bike from having reviewed it. There were a few officials early in the stage directing us onto the correct course, which helped prevent people from getting lost immediately. But the terrain became serious very quickly. We were already dealing with mud and steep climbs, and within the opening kilometers, I was passing riders who were down or stuck on all kinds of motorcycles. The larger adventure bikes had a very obvious disadvantage here because of the size and weight. As with most hard enduro style riding, outright power and speed are much less important than keeping the motorcycle upright, maintaining momentum, and being able to navigate the terrain. We were climbing through rocky sections, descending through mud, and dealing with tight forest trails. There were some faster sections as well, but nothing that the 450 couldn't handle. The bike felt comfortable both in the narrow technical terrain and on the more open, high-speed trails.
Do you remember we had dignity, sanity, a world to trust instead of biting fingers till they bleed? Do you find joy in all your shallow hell of empty noise? Our world is burning, but they'll keep on selling broken toys.
I gotta admit, I did get confused by the Roadbook a couple of times. I had to stop, look around, and try to understand where the route was taking me. But after spinning around a bit, I managed to find my way again, only to realize that the route ahead included a fairly serious hill climb. Luckily, instinct took over. I shifted early and just sent it in second gear. Halfway up, I started passing riders who had lost their momentum and were now stuck on the hill. Awkwardly, because of the difficult hard enduro style climb, I was still questioning whether this was the right way, but I just trusted the tracks and kept going. Having made it to the top gave me a bit of a confidence boost, and from there I started trusting both myself and the QJ considerably more.
Now every truth is drowned beneath the sea of vanity. You feel proud up in your tower built on fear and doubt. The sky is falling, they just smile, never call it out. Whoa, can't be it, this can't be it now. Whoa, can't be it, this can't be it now. Whoa, the bombs just never end. They detonate inside my head, tearing up my generation. Whoa, they fed us all right, buried truths until they died, leaving nothing but a salutation.
Eventually, after a bit of riding, I reached the top of the hill or mountain meadow covered in extremely dense fog. It is much easier to talk about it right now, sitting safely in the studio, but when you are alone in the middle of the Carpathians, the situation feels a bit different. This region is well known for having one of the largest brown bear populations in Europe, and there I was, riding through thick fog with very limited visibility. You inevitably start thinking about what would happen if you crashed, if something were to malfunction, or simply just got lost in the woods. Even if somebody knew you were missing, it could take quite a while for help to actually reach you. The weather also made my choice of equipment more important than I had expected. I was obviously wearing my Tech 10 motocross boots, my braces, but on the top, I decided to wear my Husqvarna Scalar adventure jacket. It had some basic armor and is much more comfortable for riding longer distances compared to motocross gear. That turned out to be a really good decision because it was frankly fucking cold in the mountains. I heard several other riders complaining throughout the event that they were freezing during parts of the stages. This was also one area where the standard equipment on the QJ motor became surprisingly useful. I turned on both the heated grips and the heated seat. I wasn't spending much time sitting down during difficult sections, but whenever I did, it was rather nice not having to deal with the cold on top of everything else. Now, obviously, if this were my own SRT 450 RX and I were preparing it specifically for rally competition, I would definitely remove the heating, some of the lights, and particularly anything else that added unnecessary weight. But that wasn't the point of this test. I'm pretty sure a lot of other professional riders will be doing a lot of those things in the future. But still, during some of those rocky sections, the bike was thrown left and right so violently that I was convinced something would eventually break off. It didn't necessarily have to be a major component. I was expecting simple things such as a headlight support, a battery bracket, a luggage rack mounting, or some other small part to shake loose or fail. At one point, I stopped to help another rider pick up their Tenere, which was also reassuring because it confirmed that I was not simply wandering alone through some completely unrelated part of the mountain. From there, I kept moving and eventually completed the first stage unexpectedly without having dropped the bike even once. But after finishing the stage and enjoying that enormous sense of relief, I started heading back down the mountain. The weather began opening up, and for the first time that day, I could actually relax slightly and take a moment to enjoy the view. Once I got back to the bivouac, I washed the motorcycle and immediately began inspecting it. I wanted to know what had been damaged and what needed to be repaired before the second stage, which would be at least 3 times as long as the first stage had been. And to my surprise, the bike was completely fine. It didn't even have a loose screw, none of the brackets had failed, nothing had fallen off, and there were no obvious signs that the motorcycle had struggled mechanically, in contrast with some of the more reputable makes that were on the trail that day. The only issue I found was a small number of loose spokes, which honestly wasn't particularly surprising after what the wheels had been through. I simply tightened them, and that was essentially all the preparation the bike needed for the following day. And with that, day 1 was finished. Both the bike and myself have survived the first stage, and I celebrated with a few drinks that evening, but I was exhausted enough that I went to bed relatively early. Day 2 started off a bit wonky because someone woke up with a bit of a hangover for some unknown reason. Not ideal considering this is the longest special stage of the rally at 220 kilometers with a refueling point at kilometer 80, but hey, what could possibly go wrong? Yup, I missed the very first turn. Well, that was a pretty decent wake-up call. From there, the adrenaline did most of its job and I slowly found my rhythm again. The bike was luckily up to the task and it behaved really well. The early sections were pretty tough, having hit dense fog, having to ride blindly hoping I was going the right way. It was also a bit disheartening to see that the kilometers just didn't want to go by. Because of the weather and the nature of the trails, I had a hard time covering distance. Not to mention that the first group I caught up to had already gotten lost 10 kilometers into the stage. All thanks to a dodgy, narrow, steep trail descending into a valley, so nobody was sure if we were going the right way to begin with. The camera really didn't do it justice because this thing really was steep, wet, and slippery. We ended up in a bit of a traffic jam, so I pretty much just had to wait my turn. This was the spot when I was just managing the front brake, caught a rock, and just tipped over. Yeah, I know, not the best situation after less than 5% of the stage. This may be an excuse, but I really think I wouldn't have dropped it had I been riding at my normal pace. I would have just descended standing up, using the engine brake in first gear, and a bit of rear brake goes a long way, and that's pretty much what I've been doing for the rest of these steep descents without any problems. But it is what it is. I had a bit of a bent handlebar, but just soldiered through. Later on, we ended up on a fire road, and it was encouraging to know that we were actually covering ground. I was riding with a group, and navigation was again the key because even though we were riding in a group, some riders still got lost. I ended up trailing a GS rider who seemed to have things figured out until I saw him drop his cow. Regardless, I helped him and still followed him onward, which I ended up regretting at around kilometer 25. I still don't understand why I didn't trust my guts and the Roadbook and just ended up following him. I guess the tracks didn't help either. Remember when I said they can get confusing? Just as a fun fact, at around kilometer 140, I ran into one of the main organizers where I took a bit of a breather, during which he mentioned that they put a hidden waypoint at kilometer 25. And I knew instantly what he was referring to for good reason. Having taken the wrong turn, we rode up and down in the forest for about 5 kilometers, only to run into what can only be described as a herd of rally riders. So the only consolation I got was that even though I knew we were going the wrong way, at least I wasn't the only one who got lost. Regardless, the bike behaved superbly so far, and after regrouping, we were back to covering ground. Occasionally, the QJ felt more like a jet ski, sometimes it felt like a dirt bike, but with all the nasty conditions thrown at us, it handled all of the obstacles really well.
I did it all, I played pretend, I moved the mountains to be your friend. I wanna know if it mattered.
Luckily, I kept a closer eye on the roadbook, and we found our way back to some faster sections, where we ended up covering more ground. Honestly, I'd love to share the whole thing with you with how cool of an experience this was, but you'd be watching a 10-hour video of raw riding footage, so we'll just have to stick to the highlights.
Remember the start when you're breaking my heart again, like blood on a pen. Would it matter then?
There were some more tip-overs where I've helped others. The steam you're seeing is from riding the QJ more like a boat rather than a bike. I was honestly surprised with how much of a beating this thing could take. There were some more parts where luckily others got lost, and this time I decided to trust my own navigation abilities, which luckily paid off.
Are we sure it's that way?
At this point we were building some speed, but occasionally a pothole full of water ended up surprising me, and I ended up slamming the belly of the QJ against the ground a few times. Maybe a stiffer preload would have helped, but I just took comfort over occasional practicality. It may have backfired, as just before the refueling point I ended up slamming the crown jewels pretty bad, just in time for a well-deserved break. Overall, on the topic of the suspension, I was really happy with the way it behaved throughout the entire rally, and I didn't feel the need to change any of the settings. I don't think my own Northern 901 Expedition would have fared any better. Definitely my 450 gas would have, but it's almost half the weight of this bike, all things considered. But I was really happy with the way the QJ handled these insane conditions overall.
We're at a refueling point, I think 80th kilometer roughly, and we have another 120 to go. Fucking mental. It was a more hard enduro than rally, but bike's holding up. I only dropped it once. My handlebar was bent a bit, but I gave it a bit of Russian love. I kind of managed to straighten it out more or less. And yeah, I don't need to fuel up because the fuel tank of the QJ 450 is like 18 liters, which will be more than enough for today's round. But if I made it till this point, I'm hoping that I'll be able to finish, but I'm not gonna lie, I am super fucking tired. You know, at least the views are nice and it's not raining. It doesn't help that it rained the entire night.
The break honestly helped more mentally than physically. The fact that I had reached that checkpoint simply meant that I could probably finish the entire thing. It was a bit more daunting in the first half, simply as I went tens of kilometers without seeing any other riders, which does make you question whether you're even on the right mountain to begin with. My pace was decent, so I did take a bit of a break to check on the bike, to make sure everything was fine aside from the bent handlebars. The whole experience was pretty eerie, being in an open field, not seeing or hearing any movement, and considering you're in the middle of a rally raid, that's a bit unusual. Regardless, I kept going, hitting the waypoints, occasionally did run into other riders, which did reassure me, but the most disheartening moment was when I realized I got lost at kilometer 199, a few kilometers before the finish in the middle of a meadow, where I ended up wasting over half an hour trying to figure out where I actually came from to begin with, let alone figure out where I took a wrong turn. Luckily, after having wasted both time and energy, I did manage to find a spot and figure out where I was supposed to go, only to find out that I actually did pretty well, even with the last mishap. Still not one of my proudest moments, but I was just glad I got the QJ motor to the finish line. Once done, I made my way back to the bivouac, washed the bike again, and I realized there that the center stand was actually stuck behind the passenger footrest, meaning that at some point I slammed the belly so hard that the thing ended up being stuck in a position it was never meant to be in. Using a bit of force, one of the QJ reps showed it some love and the stand slipped back into place, and with that the major servicing was done. I hit the bed to get ready for the final stage of the rally, which did come with some unforeseen surprises. Day 3, being the last one of the rally, made my whole anxiety go away. I was understandably exhausted, so I can only imagine what Dakar racers have to go through, having to ride multiple days back to back. This special stage was only slightly shorter at 160 kilometers, but with most of the heavy stuff being behind me and the weather having cleared up, this looked like it was gonna be a fun day as long as I could keep my act together. Same as the previous days, I was the last one to start the stage, so I kind of aimed to put in a better performance. I quickly warmed up, passed a few riders who took a wrong turn, and just kept moving. Using the iPhone as a roadbook was still really challenging, especially at high speeds, since I sometimes ended up scrolling way more than I had intended. Luck was kind of on my side though, as I ran into one of the Dutch riders with a Pro Paper roadbook.
Manual navigation.
Also struggling a bit to find the right way, so we helped each other out, figuring out where we had to go, and I did my best to keep up with him. This is what made this day so much more fun, as I could focus more on my riding and pushing the QJ450 a bit more, rather than having to constantly check the roadbook. The racer I was following, by the name of Ruud van Beek, was riding at a much quicker pace on his KTM 450 6 days, so keeping up with him was a bit of a challenge. Even so, we both had some shaky moments, which still reminded me of the fact that navigation is much more important in a rally raid than riding fast. Occasionally, you'll just end up riding away faster from the point where you got lost. After a couple of wrong turns, we did manage to find our way and kept on riding at a really decent pace. I gotta admit, personally, I was riding outside of my comfort zone, but it wasn't something that the QJMotor couldn't handle. But unfortunately, due to the nature of the trail, that fun wouldn't last, since I did run into a bit of a hiccup with the QJ. I reported straight from the site, and I'll get that rolling first, and then I'll explain what had actually happened.
So I'm at kilometer 62, 62nd, Waypoint 98. This is a big ass ascent. It's super muddy. And yeah, the clutch just gave out. I did force it, I gotta admit, because I did get stuck. There are a lot of branches like this, and I had to just put my head down because I don't have goggles. I don't want to lose an eye. Then I'm just waiting for the clutch to cool down, see if I can go at least back to the main road. But I'm not the only one that's struggling here. Like, there's at least like 3 or 4 bikes behind me that haven't made it this high up, so I guess this is a pretty cool achievement for me. And yeah, even though I was making super good progress today, but it is what it is. Third stage update. Just came from the finish, but unfortunately I couldn't finish the entire route. I had a really good pace today. I caught up to one of the Dutch riders, Ruud van Beek, and his pace was a lot quicker than mine, and I really enjoyed actually following him on the track. But we got to like the 69th kilometer, ironically, and there was a pretty gnarly ascent, but it wasn't the ascent itself that was the problem for me. It was rather the overhanging branches. I got caught in one of them and kind of got stuck, and trying to get myself out of there, the clutch started to slip really bad. And I'm not surprised, honestly. Like, even today the bike got insanely abused, and you know, I came back with the motorcycle from there. I just didn't complete the entire route. This was on the farthest point of the track today. It was roughly 100 plus kilometers away from where the start was, and I didn't want to get the guys to have to come after me in case I actually end up frying the clutch. I figured the best bet was to throw in the towel, play it safe. I've already proven that the bike is super capable. I was keeping up with rally riders that had 40,000 plus euro bikes. Bear in mind, again, this is completely stock, but overall I gotta say that I'm super, impressed with the bike. The amount of abuse I got in the last few days is insane, and now that the clutch has cooled down, it's working perfectly fine, but it is what it is.
And in hindsight, what had happened was, yeah, the clutch started to slip as soon as I tried to get myself out of that hole. What I hadn't realized though was that the QJ's clutch had already been set to the limit when I started the rally to begin with, and I hadn't adjusted it at all after the previous stages, so naturally there was some expected wear. After the clutch had cooled down, I loosened the cable, but as mentioned earlier, I was still concerned about getting stranded either way, I did ask the guys from QJ Romania to actually film the process when they replaced the discs, so I can include it as sort of proof in this video. But they simply didn't need to. The bike still has the same clutch assembly I raced with, and people are still using that bike for everyday test rides. So obviously it is doing what it is supposed to do. And I gotta admit, I am a bit salty about not having paid attention to this in advance, but we live and learn. I can guarantee it will not happen a second time. Overall, I was super impressed with how the QJMotor SRT 450 RX behaved, and this really is a bike I will probably find some room for in my own garage. In all honesty, after having raced this bike, I expected to see at least as much success as the QJMotor Ibex 450 MT, which does remind me, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the QJMotor versus QJ comparison, and feel free to press the like button while you're at it. Big thanks to the organizers of the Roadbook Adventure Challenge for even letting me participate on such late notice in the first place.
And last but not least, I want to say a big thanks to QJ Romania for giving me this opportunity in the first place to actually ride a proper rally raid with the QJ 450 RX.
Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.